Hello, this is William from First Stay Realty. Our website is firststaybc.com. Previously, I explained the importance of setting the right listing price before putting your home on the market. Today, I want to discuss pre-listing home preparation, which is just as important as the listing price. I will explain why this is so crucial and why it is important to take a strategic approach to this aspect as well. First, let's talk about the importance of a home preparation strategy. The title sounds grand, doesn't it? Regardless of whether the market is good or bad, there are always homes that sell well and homes that don't. So, how do I explain this to my clients? I tell them that regardless of market conditions, good homes always sell and bad homes always don't. It's really just a matter of time, as I've mentioned before when explaining the tipping effect. When the market is hot, a home might sell within 1 or 2 weeks, or maybe 2 to 3 weeks. But when the market is slow, it could take 2 or 3 months. In any case, good homes always sell, and homes that aren't good don't sell well, regardless of market conditions. This is what we call the tipping effect. That's how I explain it. Secondly, no matter how good the market is, a home that isn't prepared properly will have a hard time selling quickly or for its full value. Because in the end, there are two factors that determine whether a house sells: price and condition. For example, a few years ago, I listed a detached house in Maple Ridge. It was a 2-story house, about 2,000 square feet. This house had only ever been lived in by tenants. So after a few years, the owner decided to sell the house, but since only tenants had lived there, the place was a mess. Each room had a different carpet color. Nothing had been upgraded, so taking all that into consideration, we listed it about $40,000 below market value at that time. And sure enough, as soon as we did showings and open houses, the place was packed with people. At the open house, about 20 or 30 people would come by to see the place, but even with so many viewers, we weren't getting any offers. It was exhausting, so we decided to change our strategy. Instead, we thought, why not at least replace the carpet? Since it would be too much work to fix anything else, and the different carpet colors in each room were really bothering people, we decided to unify the carpet with a single color. It didn't have to be anything expensive, just something consistent. After changing only the carpet and relisting the house, we were able to sell it successfully. So, as I mentioned earlier, homes that aren't properly prepared are hard to sell easily, no matter how much you lower the price. That's why staging is so important. Ultimately, what I want to say is that home prices aren't determined by luck, but by preparation. Of course, luck does play a role. It's preparation plus luck. For example, getting multiple offers might be considered luck for a seller or for me, but it's the thorough staging and preparation that make those multiple offers possible. In other words, luck comes to those who are prepared. That's what I want to emphasize. There are 3 main categories when it comes to home staging: things you absolutely must do, optional things you can choose to do or not, and things that are not recommended. Let me explain each of these categories. First, the things you absolutely must do. If you don't do these, you will immediately lose points. The most representative and important aspect of home staging is cleaning. Regardless of whether your house is big or small, thorough deep cleaning is essential. Along with this, you must also remove scratches and stains. These are a given. You should also fix any small noticeable damages. For example, if a faucet doesn't work properly or is loose, or in the case of doors, especially sliding doors, over time, the rails can get a bit loose, making the door hard to open or close. All these small issues need to be fixed. Another thing is, you must not give the impression that the place is poorly maintained. Especially, pay attention to odors and above all mold. There must absolutely be no mold. Especially in winter, due to the temperature difference, condensation can occur, right? So because of this condensation, moisture can build up inside, and if you look at window frames and similar areas, you often find a lot of mold growing on its own. You must remove all of it, and odors are also extremely important. So as you probably know, when you list your property, owners usually can't eat properly. That's because on days when there are showings, they're concerned about odors, so they can't cook strong-smelling foods and have to stick to simple meals. In any case, odors are very important. And the most important part is that cosmetic staging must be included as a strategy here. I'll explain what cosmetic staging is and why it's important in the next slide, because cosmetic staging is the cheapest and most powerful effect you can achieve. So when many people hear the word staging, they think it's something professional and feel a bit intimidated by it. Of course, if the house is big, let's say it's a luxury house worth $4 or $5 million, in that case it's important to hire professional staging companies and spend $500 or $1,000 on staging. But in most cases, as long as the owner has a bit of an eye for detail and some aesthetic sense, you can definitely do it yourself. So cosmetic staging ultimately comes down to your mindset. If you just set your mind to it, you can absolutely do it. And what I always say is that it's similar to showmanship. It's about showing off, about presenting something. So if you think of it as showmanship, It's a bit easier to understand, and it's not about completely rebuilding the house or doing something grand. That would be more like a complete upgrade. It's about creating a house that looks appealing. The simplest way is to change things like the doorbell, door light bulbs, or the doormat. These are the most cost-effective ways to maximize the effect. That's because the first impression a buyer gets is decided right here. When they come to see the house, they press the doorbell, but it doesn't ring. Or maybe they come a bit late and none of the lights are on, or the door light bulb is out, or the doormat is extremely worn out, covered in dust and stains. Even if the house is big and wonderful, the feeling they get from the doormat alone is, oh, the owner doesn't really care about this house, or it's not very clean. Because people can get that kind of impression, it's important to change these aspects that can have the greatest effect without spending much money. So the key is the first impression and the emotional response. The core message is to make the buyer feel like they want to live there. A few years ago, I took a buyer to see a house in the Westwood Plateau area, about 4,000 square feet. The owner was Korean. I was really surprised. The house was perfect, but the cleanliness and the condition of the house made me realize that Koreans can really do this too. The house was kept in perfect condition, but what impressed me the most was that in the child's room there was a violin placed as a prop on the bed. The owner, the lady, was actually an artist, so maybe that's why she could do it, but anyway, the violin really caught my eye and left a strong impression. The truth is, when buyers look at houses, they don't just see one, they usually see several, maybe 5 or 6, grouped together for convenience. After seeing 5 or 6 houses, it's hard to remember which ones you've seen, but if there's something like a violin or a teddy bear, then later on people will refer to them as the violin house or the teddy bear house when communicating. Because we don't usually communicate simply by address, these specific types of presentation elements are very important. Creating something that truly makes the potential buyer feel like they really want to live there, that is exactly what professional staging is all about. Next, the second thing you can do as an optional choice is a significant and comprehensive cosmetic renovation or even a total property upgrade. These are entirely optional. When it comes to cosmetic upgrades, the most important thing is a strategy of careful selection and focus. The ultimate goal is to achieve the greatest possible visual effect with the least amount of cost. What I mean is, when we talk about cosmetic upgrades, the main things are usually repainting the entire interior or exterior, or perhaps replacing the flooring or carpeting. These are common, but aside from those, for example, things like high-quality doorknobs, cabinet handles, or towel racks in the bathroom, these don't cost much at all. However, it's important to use the best, most eye-catching parts for these specific items. On the other hand, things like the hot water tank, furnace, or roof aren't really visible to the eye, right? This is from the professional perspective of selling the house. If you're planning to keep living there, that's a completely different story. But if you're planning to sell, you can handle those less visible parts with more basic, mid-range options that just meet the minimum standard. Instead, focus your budget on the things that really catch the eye, like those doorknobs or cabinet handles. For those items, replace them with very high-end options. Or, in the shower booth, swap out the shower head and similar fixtures. Especially when it comes to garden maintenance, this is extremely important, particularly for single-family homes. If you look around, especially at homes owned by older couples from abroad, there are quite a few where the garden is maintained perfectly. When you visit such a house, it gives you a really good feeling. You immediately get the sense that you want to live there. The reason this is so important is that for single-family homes, the buyer's first impression is determined by the exterior of the house and the garden. Usually, buyers don't go straight inside. They often walk around the garden first before entering. That's where you capture their interest. The very first impression is determined right there. So, if you take great care of your garden, buyers will think, ah, this owner must really love their home. That means they've probably taken good care of the rest of the house as well. This kind of first impression or preconception makes everything go more smoothly. On the other hand, no matter how nice the house is, if the garden is a mess, with overgrown weeds and things not properly trimmed, buyers will think if they can't even handle something this simple, they probably haven't paid much attention to the inside of the house either. They enter with this negative impression first, which makes everything more difficult. So it's not just that garden maintenance itself is important, but that you can tell a lot from just one thing. Especially for single-family homes, the garden is the gateway that determines the first impression, which is why garden maintenance is extremely important. The second option you can consider is a complete upgrade. If you decide to go for a complete upgrade, the basic rule is to always start from the exterior of the house, especially for single-family homes. The reason, as I mentioned earlier, is that the first impression is always determined from the outside, so it's fundamental to start there. Usually when we talk about a complete upgrade, we're referring to renovating the kitchen or bathroom. As soon as you take on these projects, it becomes a major renovation, and the budget typically amounts to about 10 to 15% of the home's value, so it requires a significant amount of money and comes with considerable time and financial burdens. In such cases, it's important to be careful not to overspec. What I mean is, a few years ago, I listed a townhouse that was worth about $1 million. The owner had upgraded the house to such an extent that not only the main floor but also the second and third floors were all upgraded with hardwood flooring. The stairs were also done in hardwood. Then, wanting to install an AV system, he drilled holes throughout the house so that wires could run everywhere for speakers, and he changed all the lighting as well. He invested over $40,000 to $50,000 in these upgrades. So when it came time to list the house, he insisted, "Our house is special, it's been upgraded so much, so I want to add all of that to the listing price." We had a lot of discussions about this, but these are classic examples of overspecification. The reason is that, from the buyer's perspective, these are personal preferences. For a townhouse worth about $1 million, buyers tend to feel burdened by upgrades like a full home theater system. If they receive the house as is, they might be thankful, but if they're expected to pay extra for those upgrades, there aren't many buyers who would willingly agree to that. I remember what the owner said at the time about this kind of excessive overspec. He said, "When I first bought this house, I intended to live here for the rest of my life. That's why I upgraded it like this." But unexpectedly, he had to sell the house after just 5 years. Things like this can always happen, so you need to be careful about excessive upgrades. The second point, though this has taken a bit of time to explain, is something I want to share with you. Usually when we talk about a complete upgrade, there's a common misconception that sellers have. For example, since I mostly work in Coquitlam, in areas like Westwood Plateau or Fraser Heights in Surrey, there are certain standards in these upscale residential communities. For example, in the kitchen, granite or quartz countertops are the norm, and stainless steel appliances are standard as well. But let's say the owner has lived in the house for 20 years and never did any upgrades. Now, thinking about selling, they finally renovate the kitchen, replacing the countertops with granite or quartz and upgrading all the appliances to stainless steel. Suppose this renovation cost about $200,000. If the owner thinks, "Since I spent $200,000, I should be able to add $150,000 to $200,000 on top of the market price," that's not realistic. What they did wasn't really an upgrade. How should I put it? It was more like normalization. They simply brought a house that had fallen behind the standard up to the current standard. So calling this an upgrade would be problematic. Since there are so many misunderstandings about this, I wanted to take this opportunity to share this with you all. Lastly, let me talk about some home staging or renovations that I do not recommend when listing your house. Things that, even if you spend money on them, don't really get reflected in the sale price. First of all, it's pretty similar. Everything I've mentioned so far is included in this. If you do a major upgrade or renovation right before listing, you won't be able to recover your ROI. And if you try to reflect that investment in your listing price, it basically means you won't be able to sell your house. So I don't really recommend doing major renovations right before listing. If you want to do them, it's better to do them 2 or 3 years before you plan to sell. Next, let's talk about designs that strongly reflect personal taste. Earlier I mentioned home theater AV systems, but another example is custom-built homes. For instance, if a buyer or owner buys a piece of land and wants to build a picture-perfect house on a green field according to their own preferences, they might have a really hard time selling it later. Similarly, for condos, the standard is usually a 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom, and for townhomes, it's 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom, right? But if you buy a 3-bedroom condo or a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom townhome, you'll run into problems when you try to resell it later. That's why I always say, when you buy a house, always think about reselling it. Sticking to the standard is always the safest choice. It's easier when you buy, and it's easier when you sell. So if you go for designs that strongly reflect your personal taste, you need to keep in mind that you might not be able to recoup that investment or get your ROI back when you sell. For the same reason, I can't really recommend doing excessive renovations in a short period of time. So today, I've talked in detail about what things are essential, what things are optional, and what things you should avoid when preparing your home for listing. I tried to go through it quickly, but the content ended up being a bit long. I'll wrap up today's video here, and I'll see you again in the next one. Thank you for watching.